Take it slow, son. My voice trembled as the words slipped out, though my chest felt tight, each breath heavier than the last. I hadn't planned on saying it, not then, not like that, but sometimes your heart warns you before your mind catches up. He looked at me with confusion, as if I'd just spoken in a language he didn't understand. I forced a smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals, and pretended nothing was wrong. Inside, I was already questioning everything. It hadn't always been this way. Just months earlier, life felt simple. My son, proud and beaming, had introduced her to us one Sunday afternoon. She'd walked in with that kind of effortless grace you can't fake, her eyes warm, her laugh easy. She shook my hand like she meant it, and in that moment, I thought, this is the kind of woman who will make my boy happy. He deserved that. After all the years of watching him fight his way through life's rough edges, I thought maybe this was his soft place to land. She made an effort with us, too. Family dinners, late-night teas in the kitchen, helping me with small chores without being asked. She'd call me Mama sometimes, her voice playful, and it melted me more than I wanted to admit. My son was happier than I'd seen him in years. He worked hard, came home smiling, and couldn't stop talking about her. The little things she did, the way she listened to him, the way she made his world brighter. It was everything a parent wants for their child. But happiness has a way of casting shadows when you look too closely. I noticed them slowly. Tiny cracks you could almost ignore if you wanted to. Phone calls she'd step outside to take, her voice low, her back to the room. Text messages that made her smile in a way my son's name didn't seem to match. Once or twice, I caught her glancing at the clock, as though she were waiting for something, or someone. At first, I told myself not to be suspicious. Love requires trust, and maybe I was just overprotective. Maybe I'd lived long enough to imagine storms where there were only clouds. I reminded myself of my own past mistakes, how easy it is to doubt when you've been burned before. I wanted to believe she was exactly who she seemed to be, because believing otherwise felt like pulling the rug out from under my son's happiness. Still, my eyes couldn't unsee the little things. The faint scent of cologne on her scarf that didn't belong to my son. The hurried way she'd close her laptop when someone walked into the room. The way her smile tightened whenever I mentioned commitment or the future. None of it was enough to accuse, but together, it formed a picture I didn't want to look at. And so, I stayed silent. I watched. I waited. And deep down, I prayed I was wrong, even as my heart told me I wasn't. It began with the smallest things, the kind most people would overlook. A late return from the grocery store with a flimsy excuse. A muted phone call in the hallway, her voice soft but carrying a tone I hadn't heard before. My son would laugh it off if I hinted at anything, saying she was just busy, just tired, just distracted. He trusted her completely, and that trust was like glass, beautiful but dangerously fragile. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I had no proof, that my mind was simply looking for problems where there were none. But every time I convinced myself to let it go, another piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. There was the unfamiliar perfume on her coat one afternoon, heavier and more expensive than anything I'd seen her wear. A restaurant receipt tucked into her purse for a dinner she hadn't mentioned, dated the same night she'd told us she was working late. Still, I didn't want to interfere. This was my son's life, his relationship, his choice. I remembered my own youth, how easy it was to take someone else's concern as judgment. And yet, every mother knows the weight of instinct. Mine was screaming at me, but I smothered it under politeness, under the hope that I was imagining it all. Then one evening, I stopped by the little coffee shop near the market to pick up bread. I didn't expect to see her there, sitting in the corner with a man I didn't recognize. They weren't doing anything obvious, no holding hands, no kiss, but there was an intimacy in the way they leaned toward each other, a quiet focus that shut out the rest of the room. She didn't see me, and I left before she could. My hands shook the whole walk home. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the image, her leaning in, her smile softer than I'd ever seen it with my son. Was it innocent? Maybe. But I knew what it felt like to be the person left in the dark, and I couldn't bear the thought of my son being that person. The following days were a blur of half-formed questions and silent observations. She seemed even more careful, her phone always face down, her eyes flickering toward the door when my son walked in. My son, meanwhile, was oblivious, caught up in the belief that everything was perfect. And I was caught between the cruelty of the truth and the comfort of silence, unsure which would hurt him more. But I also knew one thing: sooner or later, the truth never stays buried. And when it surfaced, it wouldn't come gently. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment, but the truth doesn't give you that luxury. It forces its way in, breaking the rhythm of your life without warning. That morning, I'd already decided. The unease had festered too long, and the memory of her in that cafe was like a splinter I couldn't ignore. My son deserved to hear it from me before he heard it from someone else. Before speaking to him, I asked her to meet me alone. She arrived with that same careful smile, the one that had once seemed warm but now felt rehearsed. I didn't dance around the subject. I told her what I'd seen, what I'd noticed, and asked her to be honest. She didn't deny it immediately. She just stared at me, her hands fidgeting in her lap, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then the tears came, quick and unguarded, as though holding them back had been exhausting. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's been going on for months." She spoke like someone unburdening a secret too heavy to carry any longer. She told me it had started with an old friend, how they reconnected by chance. "It wasn't planned," she said, "it just happened." Her justifications felt small against the weight of what she had done. I listened, but I didn't comfort her. The hurt I felt wasn't for myself, it was for my son. Leaving that conversation, I felt both vindicated and sickened. Knowing the truth was one thing. Carrying it to my son was another. I found him in the living room later that day, scrolling through his phone with an easy smile. My heart tightened. I sat down beside him, and before I could start, he noticed something in my face. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Take it slow, son." My voice trembled. His brow furrowed, confusion giving way to concern. I told him everything, piece by piece. The signs I'd seen, the night at the cafe, the confession I'd heard only hours earlier. His expression shifted, disbelief, anger, and then something harder to watch, the dawning of betrayal. At first, he tried to deny it, searching for gaps in my story, some reason to dismiss it all. But I had no gaps to give him. When the truth settled, he went silent, staring at the floor as if the ground itself had shifted beneath him. I reached out, but he pulled away gently, his face pale, his hands trembling. There was nothing left to say in that moment. The damage was done, and all that remained was the quiet, heavy air between us, the kind that follows after a storm, when the world feels unfamiliar and you're not sure where to step next. The days that followed were heavy, each one dragging more than the last. My son withdrew into himself, speaking little, his eyes carrying a weight I couldn't lift. He went to work, came home, and avoided the spaces where she might be. When they did cross paths, the air was brittle, full of unsaid words and sharp silences. I watched from the sidelines, helpless, knowing that healing couldn't be rushed, that some wounds demanded time before they could even begin to close. She tried to speak to him at first, apologies, explanations, tearful promises, but they seemed to slide off him like rain on glass. The trust was gone, and without it, her words had no anchor. My son didn't shout, didn't curse. His calmness was colder than anger. It was the quiet of someone realizing they no longer recognize the person in front of them. One evening, he sat with me in the kitchen, staring into his cup of tea as though it held the answer. "I don't know if I can forgive her," he said finally. "Even if I tried, it wouldn't be the same." I told him the truth, that forgiveness is possible, but it doesn't erase, and that rebuilding trust is like learning to walk again after a fall. Some manage it. Some don't. And either choice requires courage. A week later, he told her it was over. There was no dramatic ending, no screaming or slamming doors. Just a quiet conversation in the living room, followed by the sound of her suitcase rolling down the hall. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed felt both painful and strangely peaceful. Life didn't bounce back overnight. My son carried the scar of that betrayal in ways only he could feel. But little by little, I saw the small signs, him laughing at a joke again, staying longer at the dinner table, speaking without that distant tone. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened its grip. I've learned that infidelity doesn't just break two people. It ripples outward, touching everyone who loves them. Watching someone you care for unravel is its own kind of heartbreak. But I also learned that endings, however painful, can be the start of something better. When I think back to the moment I first said, "Take it slow, son," I realize it wasn't just a warning. It was a plea for him to protect his heart, to brace himself for the truth I didn't want to give. And though the truth hurt, it also freed him. Trust, once broken, may never return the same, but self-respect, that's something worth guarding, no matter the cost.